Alright, so for all of you who are in my Discord, Steven's Discord, Choppa's, Mario's, wherever, and you want to learn how to play Crystrons, I'm going to teach you. Alright? So you're going to want to watch this video as we're going to talk about combos and setups. So just follow me. We are going to... Don't worry about the hand. Just focus on what's going on. Alright? So our first setup, I think I only put one controller in here, so we're going to cheat. Alright? And pretend this is our starting hand. Alright? So, we're going to set up, and I'm going to tap in here, Amatrix, Defense, Setup. Alright, this is your first Crystron setup. And you're going to need Undine plus another Crystron card. And that can be Impact. Okay? So, here's our setup. Or you can have Scrap Recycler. Alright? Normal. On summon, you're going to be able to pitch your Crystron Solfefnir to the graveyard. Now, when Solfefnir is in grave, you're going to be able to pitch your Smiger, or whatever. In this case, Smiger's the best one. Special summon, and pop. Now, in this case, they cannot floodgate. Alright, so they can't floodgate you. Now, on pop, Solfefnir is going to summon a Vern from the deck. Now, in a defensive setup, this is what you want. Alright, if you're going to go offensively, there's going to be a different setup. We're going to use this Vern's first effect to pop. Now remember, since you used the first effect, you cannot use the second effect to search if it were in the grave. And then we're going to special summon our Citri. What does that leave us with? That leaves us with a defensive option and an Amatrix on our next turn. So, if he goes, well, we normally would second, but if he goes, so it's our opponent's main phase, right? Main phase, we could start synchroing. However, they have turn priority. So, your opponent will always have turn priority. So, what does that mean? What is turn priority? That means if your opponent enters their main phase, once they enter, they can seal tombs you. So, they can seal tombs. You cannot ignite a chain before they do anything. So, they can seal tombs you. They can no mortal you. Alright? They can do that before you even have the ability to chain any of your Crystron effects. And by the way, skills do not start a chain. So keep that in mind. Alright? So, let's say our opponent special summons something to the field. I don't know, be it a Thunder Dragon Roar. Right? And we go to battle phase. Now, in battle phase, we're going to special summon our Recycler. One thing I want to note when you play Crystrons is that if they don't summon anything, you have to chain at the end of the main phase. Because a smart player may try to jump to the end phase. And when you wanted to synchro summon, then you won't be able to. Remember, your Crystron effects only work in the main and battle phase. Alright? And what I mean by that is your tuners can only synchro in the main and battle phase of your opponent's turn. Not the draw, not the standby, not the end. Alright? So battle phase, we summon our Scrap Recycler. We banish our Citri and our Recycler to summon our Amatrix. So, when Amatrix is summoned, everything goes to defense. Now you have your setup. So, what are we left with? We're left with an Amatrix in the field, a Vernon defense, and an impact. Now, further complicating this, going on now for next turn, what do we do with this? Well, this is an easy query on Gandrax because in this setup, well, this should be banished. In this setup, oh no, it shouldn't. Never mind, because I have to keep forgetting. In this setup, we would, given that we have the Smiger in the grave, we would, on our next turn, let's pretend, go back to draw, go back to main, it's our turn again, right? We draw a card, so now it's our turn, so what could we do? We could pop this, summon a Smiger from the grave, because of Amatrix's effect. Remember, this firm resolves first before your Amatrix, because that's in a brand new chain. And you would summon your Rion. And then Smiger, since you didn't use Smiger's effect, you can pop your Disfern to summon another Rion. And then you have your Quarion Gandrax. Okay? Plus, you did not normal summon, so you have that kind of a follow-up as well. So keep that in mind. You have a follow-up to do a few things, which we'll talk about later on about your follow-ups. But the first thing you need to know is that is your defensive setup. Alright? So that is Amatrix defensively. Now, what do we do about offensive setups? Normal summon your Undine. Over here. Undine on summon. So here you need Undine plus a crystron card. This is Amatrix offensively. So we're going to write Amatrix offensively. Alright, so on summon, we're going to send our Sulf to the grave. And we're going to add our Gen X controller. Now, in this case, you dump our turtle. This is really going to help. If you wanted to go Quarion, you would have that ability. For this example, we're using Transcendent Crystals. We're going to go grab our Vern. Vern's going to pop our Undine for its effect. And we go into Citri. And then we make Amatrix. This is nice because we have the ability to have an offensive monster with some defense, because if it dies, you could bring back your Sulf, your Vern, or another Citri for potential another Synchro Summon. You could easily, when it dies on your opponent's turn, summon another Citri, go into your second Amatrix. Or you could summon the Solfethnier, and that will be really good protection for you for a follow-up. So let's say Amatrix attacks, it dies, right? You summon Sulf during your opponent's battle phase, right? Now, also, when would you want to go for this? Well, if there is a situation where you really want to beat down your opponent, they weak a league monster in attack mode, or they're open directly, sometimes you want to go offensive Amatrix. Sometimes when you feel like you're going to have protection, so like against Thunder Dragons, you may want to pull off an offensive Amatrix. Generally, you're going to want to go Samurai Destroyer, try to get rid of their effects, or defensive Amatrix, but there might be cases where you want an offensive Amatrix. So, the best deck to go offensive Amatrix against, I would say, one case could be Cyber Dragons, because they're not always going to have, they're not going to have the current always, and they can't get over it with a Rampage Dragon. Some other cases where you may want to go an offensive Amatrix, or maybe if you want to go against a deck that has a weak monster in attack position, where you feel that your opponent has no life points, not no life points, but an empty field where you can get through. So that would be an offensive Amatrix. If your Amatrix dies, right, we summon Solfethnier. Now let's pretend we summon Solfethnier. It's now our turn. Main phase 1, right? And now we draw a card. And now we can summon Rosenex. Rosenex can allow us to pop our Salt. Now, in this case, we get 2 summons. One off the Rosenex, one off the Solfethnier. So we're going to go ahead and use Rosenex to summon a Rion. Sulf is going to allow us to summon a Smiger. Smiger can pop to summon a Crystron Tuner. Now, if you if you had too many Citries or you had no Rions, then you can have an option to summon a Rion by popping the Rosenex. But in this case, we want a Citry. And that is your 4-2-3 Quarion Gandrax. So, we're going to talk about Quarion setups in a bit, but easy setup. And then you drop the big boy. Right? So, that is a way to get there. Now, the last Amatrix setup we want to talk about is Amatrix Nuke. Well, Nuke the Amatrix. Alright? So, in this hand, holy moly. Hopefully you don't open too many 3 Soul Fafnir hands. But in this hand, we're going to call this Nuke the Amatrix. Okay? Now, keep in mind, Soul Fafnir cannot discard himself to summon another Soul Fafnir. You have to discard another crystron card. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead, grab our Smiger. Pop. Special summon Rosenex. You need Rosenex for this setup. This is key. You need that Rosenex, and I'm going to tell you why. Rosenex pops, you're going to get your Citry. Now, some of this may seem redundant, but it's not. Trust me. Now, you're going to banish the Smiger, get your impact. If you don't have Smiger, then you don't get the impact, but it's fine. Alright? And now you're left with a Rosenex and a Citry. So how's this going to go? Well, if you wanted to make Quarion Gandrax, you would need a Vernon hand. Alright? In that case. But we didn't have a Vernon hand, so we couldn't start off with a Quarion. This wasn't going to happen. However, in this case, we were able to set up an offensive Amatrix. Okay? An offensive Amatrix. So, how does that help us out? How does an offensive Amatrix help us out? Well, not offensive. How does a nuking Amatrix help us out? Well, I'm going to show you. Next turn, they go. We're going to activate Citry. And then we're going to synchro summon by banishing the materials. And we're going to go right into our Amatrix. Now, Amatrix and Rosenex are on the field. So hopefully in this case, when you set this up, their monsters went to defense. You could also have the option of summoning. So now you have their monsters in defense, and you're left with a Rosenex and an Amatrix. This is where it gets good. Now it's our turn again. Never mind what we drew. That's not important. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to discard the impact. It's only important what you drew if you don't have another crystron card in hand. We're going to discard the impact. Special the Soul Fafnir. Pop the Soul Fafnir. Get our Rion. And it's very important you go right to Rion here. Synchro into Black Rose Dragon. You're going to nuke your own Amatrix and whatever they have on the field. Activate Amatrix. When it's destroyed, you can special summon Crystron to resummon Rosenex. Or you could even remove a Soul Fafnir if you have another Crystron to summon in the end that can pop on the field. But in this case, we don't. Normal summon Scrap Recycler. And these are all follow-ups. Pitch the Burn. Activate Burn. Remember, we only have 3 monster zones, so keeping that in caution. Ignore the other 2. Alright? You could use Transcendent Crystals if you want to be spicy. And we've already used Soul Fafnir's effect. In this case, we're using Transcendent Crystals, so bear with me. Alright? Pop. You're a recycler to special summon a tuner from the deck. So in this case, we'll go for a Rion. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to activate Turtle Engrave, banish itself to special summon a crystron out of the hand, synchro, oops, that's not what I wanted, into Samurai Destroyer. Now, what are you left with? You're left with the fact that you nuked your opponent, and now you have a Samurai Destroyer and a Soul Fafnir. What does that mean? That's no TK. So, the reason why you went for a nuke Black Rose is because now you've put yourself in a situation that you're going to OTK your opponent on the following turn. So, you now have a Soul Fafnir in the hand to summon. If you do not have a Soul Fafnir in the hand to summon, and you're playing double Rosenex, or you have a Vern works too, that's still OTK. With a Vern, that's 15, that's 41. If you have a Rosenex, that's 44. And in this, it's 46. So you have many ways to OTK your opponent. Very, very nice. And even if they have like a Kite Roid or something, you still have that Soul Fafnir on the field that when it dies, you're going to float for even more protection. So, for example, we have a Scrap Recycle that's in the grave because of that setup. So, if this were to die and we were not to get the OTK, we would be able to special summon a Citri out of the deck and then be able to make another Amatrix for even more defensive power. That's the power of the Crystrons, alright? So, your third setup was called Amatrix Nuke. Alright? Now, the fourth setup I want to go over. Those are all the Amatrix setups. Now, the final thing we're going to discuss about is Quarion setups. Alright? And this is very important. How do we summon him? Well, I'm going to show you. First thing you need to know are your 333. And this is going to be your most common setup. It's called your 333. Alright? Now, in this case, ignore the hand. The hand is great, but don't look at the hand. Your 333 is going to involve this, or Vern, and another Rion. Vern works too. So does a Scrap Recycle that you may have on the field already. Any level 3 monster with 2 tuners. Generally, it's going to be Vern, Smyger, and 2 Rions. Alright, Vern or Smyger and 2 Rions. So this is your 333. 2 tuners, a non-tuner. You send these to the grave, and you get out your Quarion Gandrax. This is a very important setup. You must know this, and you must be fast with it. You must be able to recognize playing Crystron. I can do this. I can drop that Quarion, and I'm going to annihilate my opponent when doing so. Okay? So, you know, that you got to be able to recognize when that's coming out in order to play this deck. Alright? And a good idea when making Quarion is to make sure you have a follow-up to that Quarion. So if you could summon a Citri thereafter, that way if you go up against something like Lunalights, and they want to follow up and drop that Lunalight Crimson Fox, that way they can't OTK you. Make a very, very big brain play that way. Now, the next setup we're going to talk about is your 4-2-3. So that is Rosenex, Rion, Citri. This is your 4-2-3. Your 4-2-3 is going to involve Rosenex, Citri, and Rion. And the most common way that this is going to come out is the way I discussed before. Remember that Amatrix nuke? Well, going back to this field, saying we have Soul in the grave, right? And we have these in the deck, right? So you have that setup, right? We have, let's just say for argument's sake, we banish your Recycler and your Citri, right? Hope you guys are still following. You can always replay this. And let's say we have an Amatrix on the field, right? So the most common way we're going to accomplish this goal is we're going to have this on the field. We can pop with Rosenex. In this case, we'll go a little bit different than we did with the Black Rose setup. We're going to be able to summon from the deck. Oops, excuse me. Give me 1 second. in this case, alright, you see the setup we have here, right? In this case, we'll go back to this setup, right? We're going to activate, well, we don't have another crystron in hand that we could discard, but, and assuming so, that we did, alright, in this case, let's just say we have another crystron in hand, because it's very important, otherwise you can't do the setup. Alright, you have another crystron card in the hand to discard, right? So, you're going to pitch Soul Fafnir. With a summon, there we go. You pitch your Vern, summon your Soul, activate, pop, summon anything. It could be a Smiger, it could be whatever. Did it not summon? It did not summon. There we go. And now, you pop this, summon your 3, and then you go summon off your Rosenex, 2, and there's your 4-3-2. Now, if I know I'm doing this, let's say that with Salt, right? We ended up sending a Smiger to the grave, right? So we have a Smiger in grave ahead of time, right? So I know I'm in this situation, right? And I have a Smiger in grave. If I'm going for this setup, generally, I don't want any part of Searching Impact. So if I'm going to go for the Amatrix nuke, this is the ideal way. That was another way that I showed you, but this is the ideal way. I'm not going to search Impact, unless I have to. Alright, so if I go for this way, I'm going to pop. I'm going to summon my Rion out of the deck. Then I'm going to activate Amatrix. Special summon the Smiger back. And then, remember that nuke setup? That also works for Aquarion setup. So, off that one play, we now have an instant Aquarion Gandrax. And that is your 4-3-2. The second way I showed you is the most ideal way of setting up your Aquarion Gandrax. And that is basically what we call a free Aquarion. Because the reason why we call it free Aquarion is because you really didn't have to summon anything out of the hand to do it or expose your hand afterwards. So that essentially becomes a free Gandrax for you. So that is an easy way to get your Aquarion out. The last couple of ways I'm going to show you is your 5-2-2. Alright? So your 5-2-2 is a little bit more complicated. It's basically when you have an Amatrix. In this case, you would normal Citri, hopefully have a Soul from the grave at this point. And then you would pitch your, whatever, in this case, Turtle. Any crystron monster or card will work. Pop. You could feed another crystron in the graveyard for next turn. So, let's say you pop this on field, summon, and that's your Aquarion Gandrax. Alright? And then the last one is your 6-2-1, which in this case, we're going to pretend that Amatrix is a White Aura Dolphin. So White Aura Dolphin has the ability to come back as a tuner when it's destroyed in battle, or card effect. So you bring it back, then you have your Citri out, and then you would have a Rosenex engraved. You banish the Rosenex, summon your token, and then 6-2-1 would be Aquarion Gandrax. If you have Tunemorph normal, and you're using that skill and not Transcendent Crystals, you would be able to use this with Paladin Zektron, because then you could turn this into a tuner. So, just giving you a few ways to summon your Aquarion Gandrax. So, if you have not followed, make sure you're following Chophead Steven on Discord and Twitch and YouTube. Subscribe to my YouTube, Twitch. Also make sure you subscribe to Razor. He's a phenomenal TC Razor, a friend of mine, phenomenal crystron player as well. But make sure you are following all of us. Okay? That is Tilt Betray, giving you a crystron tutorial, at least somewhat, signing